Yes, I hope you can see my slides. Good morning, everyone. Do you see them?
Yes.
Yes. Now yes. So thank you very much for the invitation. It is really a pleasure for me to be here with you today and to share some ideas and reflections about low fertility. And just anticipated that someone is saying that nobody knows exactly what is happening about fertility decline, and I'm focusing especially on high-income countries. Historically, sudden economic shocks have left a clear imprint on annual fertility rates. The Great Depression of the 1930s is an example when a rapid increase in unemployment was followed by a drastic drop in fertility. And the oil price shock of 1973 is another historical example of how recessions lead to lower fertility. And we do have also a contemporary example, the Great Recession. This figure is probably well known to many of you. Fertility reversal after 2008 was especially pronounced in countries and regions that experienced stronger economic downturn and faster increases in unemployment. But what is especially unique by this recent crisis is that, differently from the crisis of the past, this Great Recession arrived in a time in which fertility was, at least in Europe, increasing in many countries. So there is a discontinuity in the fertility trend. And this discontinuity in the fertility trend is not only a temporary phenomenon. If we continue following our trends, you see that we are now dealing with a relatively homogeneous fertility decline across many high-income countries. Norway reached its lowest total fertility in history in 2022. Finland also reached its lowest fertility in history in 2022, 1.3, almost the same level in Finland as in Italy. 1.3 children per woman, down from 1.9 in 2010. Even in France, we are used to have France as a benchmark in terms of family policies. Fertility is progressively decline. And the black line here in the graph is Italy. Of course, we were starting from a very low level, so we cannot go much down, but still, every year we have an erosion in our fertility level. And fertility now is closer to our historical minimum in 1995 than our rebound in 2008, and now fertility in Italy is 1.2 children per woman on average. And these are just a few examples of a very generalized fertility decline of many high-income countries. The question is why, and the central explanation that I will put forward in this presentation is the rise of uncertainty. The increasing speed, dynamics, and volatility of outcomes of globalization, the new wave of technological change, make it increasingly difficult for individuals to predict their future and choose between alternatives and strategies. The Great Recession just renewed the view that globalization is unpredictable and out of control. This state of affairs generates an extraordinary level of contingent uncertainty that sums up to a fundamental uncertainty that is always related to the decision of having a child. You don't know what will happen with a child, which represents, I think, this contingent uncertainty, the game changer in contemporary societies and family life courses. How can we operationalize this idea of uncertainty? At the macro level, I refer to a recent study conducted by Tomasz Sobotka and Anna Matysiak, which is published in European Journal of Population. In this study, we applied a three-level growth curve model on 251 European regions. And we found quite surprising findings. In Western Europe, and especially in Nordic countries, fertility rates were not closely associated with recession indicators, with classical recession indicators like the rise of unemployment, long-term unemployment. Our findings rather suggest the salience of other factors, like the subjective perception of uncertainty that we could not capture in our models but this kind of subjective aspects may have rose predominance during the Great Recession. Moving from the macro level to the micro level, at the micro level, empirical tradition operationalizes the forces of uncertainty through objective indicators of actual and past individuals' labor market situation, and at best, their subjective perception. Nowadays, in demographic and sociology journals, paper addressing the relation between fertility and unemployment, fertility and temporary employment are now booming. There is an explosion of this kind of papers that are trying to link labor market performance and fertility. I'm not reviewing a specific study, but I mentioned this publication in Demography that is a meta-analysis of all what has been published until 2019 about the effect of employment instability on fertility, the effect of unemployment and jobs with limited time, with limited duration on fertility. Apart from several key findings from the study, the take-home message here is that although not negligible, the effects of unemployment and limited time employment on fertility are not of major magnitude. So something else is at play. And this kind of analysis, micro-level analysis, I love this kind of analysis. I'm for sure will continue to address this kind of studies, but they are unable to explain what is actually happening. For example, what are the driving forces of the fertility decline in Nordic countries after a Great Recession that in hard numbers they really never experienced, or at least not to any relevant extent? And what are the driving forces of such a generalized fertility decline that European societies are currently facing? My argument is that we need to roll back to the original definition of economic uncertainty, and we were failing in the way we were operationalizing uncertainty. Uncertainty primarily means the lack of clarity about future economic prospects, unknown probability distributions to possible outcomes. So already from this clear definition of uncertainty, uncertainty is about the future, is not about the present or the past. And cumulative employment disadvantage and its perception just identify what we can refer to as the statistical shadow of the past and tell us little about uncertain futures. We think that to properly address the effects of uncertainty on family dynamics, we need to change perspective, recognizing that economic uncertainty is a forward-looking notion. So uncertainty needs to be conceptualized and operationalized, taking into account that people use works of imagination, producing their own narrative of the future. Uncertainty is anchored in narratives that are imagined futures embedded in social elements. So personal narratives of the future are potent, driving forces of reproductive decisions in spite of uncertainty or according to uncertainty, quite irrespective of structural constraints and their subjective perception. To operationalize the role of uncertainty on family dynamics and to offer the proper theoretical premises for this kind of analysis, we have developed the so-called narrative framework, which provides the elements to operationalize uncertainty. Let me try to be a bit more analytical and to present this narrative framework. So the starting point is the fact that in the fertility decision-making process, we start as a first element from our past experience and the personal predispositions, risk aversion, loss aversion, and so on. Then the second element is our present status, our actual economic condition. After all, cumulative past experiences, personal predispositions over the life course, and the present status are the standard element usually employed as determinants of fertility, intentions, and behaviors in the great majority of demographic and sociological papers. The next level concerns the perception of personal condition. Michaela Kreinfeld, in her article in 2010 in European Sociological Review, pioneered all the new strand of literature in which perception were added as a key element in the decision-making process. She emphasized that people with the same employment condition might, however, differ in the way they feel, tolerate, and react to uncertainty. Altogether, these three elements, past experience, status, and perceptions, are what we can refer to as the shadow of the past of the decision-making process. This is what is usually employed in our fertility modeling. But fertility decisions are not merely a shadow of the past. The specter of the future also matters. The additional first element to be considered is expectations. Expectations represent what people expect will happen in the future based on their available information. Then, in addition to expectation, we do have imaginaries. Individuals have agency and may wish a future irrespective of their actual conditions. And then the final element of the narrative framework are the narratives of the future, based on the shadow of the past, based on the expectations and our goal, our wishful future. People project themselves into an actionable future, their narrative of the future. So what I'm adding here is that in addition to the shadow of the past, what is rising importance under uncertainty is also the shadow of the future in our decision-making process regarding fertility. And clearly, all these different elements that influence the decision-making process are deeply influenced by the social context and especially in our time by shared narrative shared by media, social media, the press. I give you an example, 3 simple words, whatever it takes, pronounced by the then president of the European Central Bank, Mario Draghi, proved strong enough to debunk a global financial speculation against the euro in 2012. Of course, the European Central Bank was ready to unleash its monetary power, but this was unnecessary. The narrative of a new attitude of the European Central Bank for the future was enough. This is a textbook example in economic sociology to suggest that actors, social actors, take decisions also irrespective of the structural constraints. Now, the new narrative of the future also matters. Clearly, these personal narratives of the future are anchored in existing cultural and institutional frames. They are strongly shaped by the media. Look at this, for instance, in the New York Times. Are you ready for the financial crisis of 2019? We were far from the Great Recession and still not in the COVID-19 pandemic. And still, the media were constantly talking about new recessions. And this has been also reinforced not only by uncertainty seeping into our lives from the economic domain, but also uncertainty seeping into our lives also from a more social and political domain. This is an example from an article from The Guardian, My Brexit Nightmare, readers on how the uncertainty is affecting their lives. There is also a change in the way we talk about uncertainty in the media, from presenting facts into directly entering into the lives of individuals. And from the most recent Eurobarometer survey, the most important fear of Europeans is now political instability. So this global political uncertainty has reinforced the narrative of an uncertain future among citizens. This is our narrative framework. So the key point is that to really understand what is happening to fertility nowadays is that we need to add a key element, the shadow of the future and the narratives of the future. The focus on past and actual structural constraints and their subjective perception is not enough to explain what is happening. Net of factors, and I use net of factors in the sense that in our statistical modeling, we still need to control for present status and past employment, but we also need to add the shadow of the future. How to do this in practice is not easy, but in a series of projects we coordinated here at the University of Florence, we tried to operationalize narratives of the future as determinant of fertility intentions and behaviors. And I give you an example based on cross-country laboratory experiment we conducted. And the key paper is here published in the European Journal of Population. So what we did is to organize the cross-country lab experiments to assess the role of different economic narratives of the future on fertility intentions. We had 423 couples coming to our labs in Florence and 438 in Oslo. The sample is women and men in their reproductive ages, and the data collection was conducted prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. So it is not affected by the uncertainty by the COVID-19 that served actually as a multiplier of uncertainty. In the lab, here colors symbolize any differentiating attribute among the individuals participating in our lab, and in the lab we even collected person-specific risk aversions of our participants. Then mock newspaper stories were used as treatment to manipulate respondents' perception of a critical situation. 1/3 of our sample was exposed to a positive, stable economic narrative of the future, 1/3 to a negative economic narrative of the future, and then we had our control group. Finally, we ask, as an outcome variable, do you intend to have a child in the next 3 years, which is a classical fertility intention question that is known to be a quite good proxy of subsequent behaviors. You see that this is Florence. In Florence, those who were exposed to, in a scale from 0 to 10, the fertility intention, how likely is that you will have a child in the next 3 years? Those exposed to the positive scenario have an average fertility intention of 7.1, negative scenario 4.2, and no scenario 5.3. While in Oslo, we have essentially the same situation in which the positive scenario is less effective, while the negative scenario is more effective. In a lab, this automatically controls for any alternative explanation, and this is already a causal effect. But of course, we also run regressions to also clean the estimations from and be able to improve the external validity of our findings. And these are predicted fertility intentions based on the 3 scenarios: no scenario, negative scenario, and positive scenario, net of many confounders at the individual level. You see, again, exactly the same finding. The narrative of the future was clear to determine fertility intentions, with Florence more subject to the positive narrative of the future, and Oslo more subject to the negative narrative of the future. And this is quite straightforward. This is called in social psychology distant experience. The narrative is more effective if it is far from your daily life. And in Italy, we are used to a more turbulent economic scenario, so it's the positive narrative of the future, the positive news that are effective. While in Oslo, in Norway, they are more used to a stable and prosperous economic context, so it's the negative news that do have an effect. We also published several other papers in which we clearly show effects of the narratives of the future in a time of uncertainty as determinants of fertility. Please feel free to email me if you want to know more about our papers. We also worked on the effect of media and social media, on observational studies, not only on experiments, and we also conducted qualitative research. I just mentioned one key paper that was also published in Demography. We were able to link the economic news coded daily for 20 years from the main evening newscasts in Italy on behaviors. And we do find a clear effect of how the economic news were pitched by our main news, main evening newscast. It had an effect on fertility. So really, it is not only actual and structural constraints, but it is also the media narrative that has an effect. So I think that it's true, it's really something that we don't know, the future of fertility, but more research is needed to address the role of personal and shared narratives of the future in the study of family dynamics across time and space in the era of globalization, technological change, COVID-19 pandemic, and also now the war. The key challenge is to change our perspective. For many years, we were focusing in analyzing the differences between Italy and Norway. Now, I think the key point is to analyze the commonalities. What is the underlying cause of the similar trend impacting both Italy and Norway? And a very promising line of investigation for the future is also to enlarge the concept of uncertainty from the economic domain also to the social political domain. And also it can be that there is a generalized change in preferences that could be endogenous or exogenous to the role of uncertainty. So thank you very much.